I'll just set the context, but before that, I'll just set also the timings, because CII and we, all of us, need to be very particular. This session is from 2:30 till 3:15. I will take about 4 to 5 minutes, hand over to both of them for a 10-minute chat on their views. And then we would have 15-minute question answers. If something comes from the hive, Baba, Naren, I will address it to you. I have a few also pointed questions for you. And after that, we'll have just the last 5 minutes of closing remarks. So without much ado, and since none of us have slides and it's more a candid conversation, I'd like to just set the context and also ask some of these points that if you would reflect upon with the huge experience that you have, both nationally and internationally. In India, we've talked for a long time about the 25% manufacturing as GDP, and we know that it has been discussed a long time, but we are far away from where we can and where we should be. And your thoughts on that area would be very, very important, especially in the context of Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, and in the context of the changed geopolitical situation that we face, where today, with the sudden situation in Europe and a situation which is happening across also in China and different parts, many countries are looking today at India with renewed focus. So how are we going to remain competitive? How are we going to deliver not only for our country, but also for the world? We have a huge set of MSMEs, and we know compared to the bigger companies like ours, the MSMEs, the delta gap is massive. Your thoughts on the MSME, the delta gap, our responsibility, not just as CII, but with big corporates, Jugalbandi, and this topic also has been talked a lot. Another very important area is India has always done a very amazing thing, which the world has looked quite, with surprise and sometimes even skepticism, but also awe, which is leapfrogging. The latest set of situations on PLI are one more example of getting advanced technologies into place and ensuring that India further leapfrogs. Baba, you supply and you're a partner to practically all OEMs, not just in India, but more importantly across the world. And in the last 7 years, we have nearly come to the European norms of emission. And we have also leapfrogged on that example of BS4 to BS6 in 3 years' time, as compared to 8 years, what it took Germany or Europe. Now, we have leapfrogged on digital. The Aadhaar is an example, our digital wallets are an example. How do we leapfrog in manufacturing, in not just the traditional manufacturing, but also the aspect of digital? I find today Industry 4.0 is still not demystified. I find small applications are very less and far and few between, especially in the MSMEs. It is only a few privileged few who are using and applying this. And I would say the question that I would also leave in a humane manner, because we in India, we need to do this keeping in mind also our labor force. Let me give you one small example of how changes are happening. And from the automotive industry, where I come from, if you needed in the world 10 in diesel, you needed 10 people versus gasoline 3 to manufacture an EV 1. In India, you needed 15 and you needed 5 against 3 and maybe 2 for EV. Now, how are we going to manage this part? How are we going to manage the labor models? And again, both sides of the coin on fairness. How are we going to manage on competence building? Because we can't rely on cheap labor. But the most important thing that I would request before handing over is, how would corporates do a Jugalbandi through organizations like CII, with the government, to make this dream a reality? Many of the things that we've talked for a long time. And finally, it's about people. I find the new generation having greater interest in many areas beyond manufacturing. Yes, of course, manufacturing attracts, We are big engineering companies. But how do we bring that charm back in manufacturing with advanced technologies, with digitalization, with AIoT, and still ensure that we have the people, the competence, and finally, the ability of India to be a competitive market and an exporter. I'd like to end by saying also responsibility in manufacturing is responsible manufacturing. Source, make, deliver. The make part, we focus a lot. What about the source and the deliver? A few hints on that would be excellent. And lastly, on climate change. Manufacturing has a very important footprint on climate change. We at Bosch, and Baba, you know that since 2020 have become carbon neutral across the world. How can we look at carbon neutrality as an investment and also which is finally linked to manufacturing? So I would first like to call Mr. Baba Kalyani. You need no introduction. As the managing director and the chairman of Bharat Forge, and having not just a national and an international footprint, I'm deeply privileged to be in conversation with you. Baba, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Soumitra. I mean, first of all, you've asked so many questions. It's a bit difficult for me to track what is the first question and what are the last questions. But I get the theme in general. So I'll give you my views on some of the questions you have asked and a little bit of a background in terms of what I think this context of future of manufacturing in India is going to look like. First of all, I think we should have no doubts in our mind that manufacturing is going to grow in India and it's going to grow in a very big manner. Unfortunately, we have been through too many crises in the last few years, starting with COVID, and then now this conflict in Europe and the hyperinflation that this conflict is causing, and its impact in terms of the responses by various central banks, and that impacting capital flows and all kinds of things. So we live in a very, very uncertain period with a very volatile systems, with a very volatile market. Just to give you some examples of this volatility, especially in Europe and North America, the demand for every product is extremely high, but the actual production of every product is extremely low. So we've got into huge issues there in terms of how the supply chains are working and the impact of the war in Ukraine that's going on. But notwithstanding that, let me share in terms of India and where we think India is going. First of all, I think as a country we have staged a very dramatic recovery after the COVID issues in terms of our whole economy. India is now one of the fastest growing economies on this planet. We are also, through this entire program that the Honorable Prime Minister has put out, the Gati Shakti program, huge investments in modernizing our infrastructure. And I think this is extremely important for the manufacturing sector to grow in the future. So we are modernizing our infrastructure. There's a huge amount of money being spent, over $1 trillion. We have also generated an extremely good response to climate change in terms of the amount of renewable energy capacity that we have put in and planning to put in the next 7-8 years up to 2030. And companies that have taken dramatic steps to convert their manufacturing to green. And I will talk about this a little more in details. So our response to climate change is not just reactive, but it's very transformational as a country. And we have tremendous more opportunities to deal with as we move forward. I was in Denmark with the Prime Minister a few days ago, and I just, to my great astonishment, I heard how we can use the huge population of cattle that we have in this country to beat climate change. Okay? And, the Danish are very good in agriculture and cattle and dairy and all that. So they're doing tremendous amount of research. So some things with the Danish businesses will start happening in this area. We have a huge scale. India offers a huge scale for the domestic market. With 1.4 billion people, you can't beat the scale that India has. And therefore, we also have, because of scale, a very large competitiveness in many markets many products that we produce. A good example of that is, automotive, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, components, and that kind of thing. And lastly, our demographics. If we can leverage our demographics, our youth, with the right type of training, moving them to digital training. I mean, what I heard in Germany was that India now has the largest amount of digital transactions on this planet. More than all of Europe put together, more than the US put together per day. So, we are making progress in many, many areas. But there are a lot of gaps that we need to fill as far as the manufacturing sector is concerned. And, you talked a lot about AI and IoT and, digital. I mean, every company is doing work in that area. I mean, companies like ours, we are using IoT, and we have got to a stage where we have almost come to zero maintenance in many of our plants because of this and because of the whole application of digital technology and AI. So it's not that we don't understand this. I think, many of us understand this extremely well. Many Indian companies are working in this area. We have two big problems that we need to tackle, and those problems pertain to talent. We have historically a talent pool that is, based on analog technology. And, there is a immediate need that you need to convert your existing talent pool to digital. Now, that easily said, but not easily done, because you have labor regulations, labor laws, all kinds of things that will hinder this process. And you have seen this in your own companies. Every time you want to make a change, what kind of problems you face. So I think this is something that industry and government needs to work together. We need to modernize and get our labor laws oriented towards getting our workforce trained to digital. You cannot have a workforce that comes out of your existing ITIs and doing digital work. It's just not possible. So I think that is the biggest challenge that we have got. The biggest opportunity that we have in terms of talent, all the young engineers that are coming out of our businesses, even university graduates, and in many universities today, you have digital programs, you have AI programs, and you have all kinds of new courses that are available in this direction. We are beginning to see this as a talent pool that we can use to create manufacturing outside India. Because the big problem outside India is non-availability of labor. It's very difficult to find trained manpower, even in Germany, even in the United States, even in other parts of Europe. And I think in the next few years, you will find that India will start sending a lot of people, Indian companies will start sending a lot of people to run factories in these places. So you will see a lot of reversal that we have seen from before. And lastly, I would talk about, let's say, 5 factors that will drive manufacturing in the direction that you mentioned. One, we need technology-enabled innovation to drive manufacturing. This is what your theme was, whether it's digital, AI. But what I mean by technology-driven innovation is Indian companies must own the IPR, the intellectual property rights, or whatever they are making. And if India doesn't own its own IPR and just remains as a slave manufacturing nation for other countries, we are never going to grow in manufacturing. So this is the first point I'd like to make. The second point is we need to strengthen our foundational capabilities. And this is happening with the new policies of the government in terms of semiconductors, electronics, the whole PLI scheme that has come out. Because any manufacturing you look at today will require semiconductors, will require electronics. And this is one bus that we missed many years ago. And we need to get on this bus again. And the government has created a fantastic policy, both for semiconductors and for electronics, and the PLI scheme that is going to push all this forward. Otherwise, things like electromobility or whatever else that you're talking about just simply won't happen. Advanced manufacturing won't happen. Third is to create a highly skilled digital workforce, which is what I talked about. But I think there's a complete need to change our entire syllabuses where workforces are trained. We need to create a completely new system. We cannot depend on the ITIs. ITIs are not going to create the workforce of tomorrow. And we need to, fourth is to drive competitiveness by creating an enabling environment. I have talked about it as the head of the manufacturing mission for CII for the last 2 years, many times on this. The government itself is talking about ease of doing business, but there is a lot of problems at the state levels. At the central level, yes, things are happening, but the manufacturing doesn't happen in Delhi. It happens in the states. And therefore, there's a lot of ease of doing business requirement at the state levels. And the last point is to align with the net zero ambition. My gut feel is we will be way ahead of Europe and the West in terms of becoming a green manufacturing country. Much faster, much sooner, and much more nimbler. We can see that many of our companies will be able to put the green stamp on their products much faster than what Europe can put. So I would like to end it here.
Thank you very much, Baba. I was, making diligently some notes also for a few questions afterwards. But the questions come to you a little later. I would like to invite Naren. The floor is yours, and then we can have the Q&A.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Baba.
Thanks, Soumitra. I'll try to again address some of the points that you raised and add some of the first and foremost, manufacturing to me is extremely important, and we are fooling ourselves if we think that we can just move from being
You're frozen. We can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me, Soumitra?
Yeah, can hear you.
Okay.
Is it okay, Baba?
I think his video is frozen, so maybe the problem is that.
Okay, so I can hear you loud and clear.
Sure. Okay. So, I think at a very fundamental level, I want to emphasize that manufacturing, I think, is a very, very important part of our development journey. I think while services-led growth does address a lot of problems, we must not forget the fact that a lot of services kind of jobs are created in urban centers, whereas manufacturing actually creates jobs across a country, in different parts of the country. And there are many urban centers which are created around manufacturing centers. So I think we should not underestimate the importance of that. Of course, we've not had the success that we aspire to have. We are at 15-16% manufacturing. I think the whole policy framework around Atmanirbharta, I think, is very important. There is sometimes criticism saying that it's protecting domestic industry. Again, I beg to differ there because, we should not forget the fact that, there are problems to solve and we need to solve those problems, right? And the first and foremost problem is of jobs. You have more than 1 million people joining the workforce every month. And in an ideal world, if you have free flow of people, then people will go across the world and find the jobs. And as Baba said, there are many developed countries who are short of labor. But people cannot move around so easily. So, they need to find jobs in their home countries. Secondly, when you look at policy, sometimes we compare it to the past. But in the past, capital could not flow in freely into the country. There were a lot of licenses and a lot of restrictions. Whereas today, across industries, you can have 100% FDI. So we made it easy for capital to flow in. And the third part is goods. So if I look at people, capital, and goods, I think a lot has been done on making sure that capital can flow in easily and FDI can come in. You can be 100% owner in many industries where you can't be 100% owner in many other countries, right? So I think we are moving in the right direction. We can build competitiveness in India as long as we encourage competition, right? And we are encouraging competition. We are not closing it to competition. We can build competitiveness in India because in India you can build scale, right? Unlike many other countries who had to export manufacturing. And I think as CII, we've talked to the government about that. And I think the recent PLI on textiles is a good example of that, because sometimes the schemes are favoring capital intensive manufacturing where you may not be creating so many jobs. You also need to create, you need that, as well as you need to supplement that with labor intensive manufacturing. Textiles is a good example. Electronics manufacturing is another example. Of course, even furniture, things like that are also examples of manufacturing which are labor intensive. You asked about MSME. Has to be the backbone of manufacturing. There's no great manufacturing nation in this world which doesn't have a strong MSME sector, right? I mean, typically they account for 40% of the GDP. So we need to work as CII, as big companies, to see how can we create a strong MSME network. Again, auto industry is a great example of creating a vendor base of MSMEs who are competitive and of high quality. So I think that's something we need to scale up. We need to help our MSMEs. I was excited to hear in the morning in the startup session that was there about a company providing solutions to MSMEs. One of the startups who was there in the morning. And so that's a great example of how technology, entrepreneurship can support MSMEs in this journey. The role of CII through the centers of excellence, through the multiple initiatives that we have, and because of the fact that we are a good platform for big and small companies, I think there's certainly a big role that we can play, and because we have a voice as far as policy making is concerned with the government. Now, stepping back a bit or going a little bit more into a company-specific narrative, I think few things we need to think about when you look at the future of manufacturing or digital transformation. Firstly, it's a business transformation. It should not be seen as an IT project. Companies sometimes make a mistake of thinking digitization is something the IT department should do. I think this is to be owned by leadership. It's not about embedding technology in existing processes, but about rethinking processes, rethinking business models using technology that is available. It is about redefining competition, redefining markets, redefining the products. You may be selling solutions instead of products, and you may be selling convenience. You may be selling many number of things to differentiate yourself. As process industries, for instance, we generate a huge amount of data. We capture only a fraction of that data, and we use only a fraction of what we capture, right? And we've achieved all that we've achieved by just doing that. So you can imagine the potential to achieve a lot more by capturing a lot more of the data which is generated and using it. So having analytics, having insights to overlay those analytics, training your workforce to be able to use that so that you are not dependent on intuition and experience more than you need to be, and you can use data to really be a strong foundation for a lot of the decisions that we make. We talked about climate change. I think circularity, sustainability are very important parts. Again, it's not a compliance issue. It's a business continuity issue. It's a social license to operate issue. And here again, when you look at resource efficiency, etc., you can use data, you can use analytics, you can use a lot of technologies today to drive greater energy efficiency, resource efficiency, water efficiency, whatever. So I think there's again a great opportunity for us to do that. Supply chains are being restructured now. Earlier, it was optimized around costs. Today, it's being optimized around resilience. It's being optimized around business continuity risks. And that means there's more regionalization and localization of supply chains. It's a great opportunity for India because India is not just a source; it can also be a market, as we discussed. So finally, to me, the biggest opportunity for us is we are a young country. It's an opportunity and a challenge. So we have a lot of people coming into the job space. We are now becoming the center of gravity as far as startups are concerned with 100 unicorns. I'm told a significant number out of the unicorns being created across the world is now from India. We have a, digitally, progressing kind of nation as well as a technical workforce which is available. We are creating new assets because we are just about started the journey of building new factories and bringing in investments, etc. So we don't have we will not have the problem of having too many legacy assets. We will have legacy assets, but the assets that we create can be greener, cleaner, smarter, and can have technology embedded in it. So, it's a bit like the airlines companies. The ones who buy the newer aircrafts have an advantage over the ones who have the older ones. So similarly, as we create new facilities in India, we can certainly be more competitive, and we don't need to make the mistakes some of the other countries made in this journey of development. So I think I'll stop there. I think I see it as a great opportunity for us in manufacturing to marry the capabilities that we have with the opportunities that are coming towards us and really build a future where, we have a very, very strong backbone in manufacturing.
Thank you very much, Naren. Excellent. I also made quite a few notes so that both if they come from the hive, which I'll be looking into, or I'll just start off. So, Baba, if I may start off with some of the points that you mentioned, and to make it a little more interesting, even challenge some. The first area that I would like to ask you is a very important point that you touched, but we don't talk too often, and we have not been able to, let me put it, at least my view, score the goal on meaningful dialogue resulting in sustainable outcomes. The topic, center state, and what happens in the center and what we see in the states and the delta gaps. How do we cover these delta gaps where the states, to a great extent, I'm not saying all states, if I just take the 8 states which account for practically 75% of our GDP, look at it, and the simple example, ease of doing business, and actually make it happen on the ground. So your views on this very important point on scoring the goal where center and state needs to be aligned, do a jugalbandi, focus on vital topics, and work, and industry works in a constructive manner.
Well, I think that is probably the most important factor, because as I said, factories are not going to be in Delhi, they're going to be at the states. And the only way to do it is through dialogue. The problem is, it is very difficult in the environment that you have today, going around in the states. I mean, you see this in the news morning and evening. It's very difficult to be critical of anything that's going on at the states. And unless you're going to be critical of what is going wrong, you're not going to be able to improve it. I mean, we have many forums for this dialogue. CII is one of the forums. There are many other, local associations. There are local chambers of commerces. There is all kinds of things. But the amount of regulation that is there at the state level in every activity of business, especially manufacturing business, is extremely high. And unless and until we can make it simpler, we can make it easier, I'm not saying that we need to get rid of regulations. We need regulations. But you need regulations that do not stop business, that do not make business uncompetitive. And that is what is happening today. I'll give you some simple examples. You want to buy land for a factory. The land prices today for most factories are probably running into 20-25% of the total investment that you end up making in setting up a plant. This is how expensive land has become. And the reason why this has become expensive is the whole process of generating stamp duty revenues and changing the valuations of land every year so that your stamp duty revenues go up, keep increasing the prices of land where it really shouldn't. And so we have got ourselves into all kinds of problems with the process that we have got. And we really need, CII had actually started this process a few years ago of ranking states in terms of their competitiveness, ease of doing business. But I think we just need to follow that up a lot more and have dialogues at the state levels in a lot more, informal, formal fashion. But there are some states that are doing fantastically well in this area. One of the states I'd like to mention is Telangana. There is a tremendous dialogue that goes on with the government of Telangana and business, no matter which business you want to be there. And they have processes where you can get approvals in 24 hours for things. You get, you will get manpower as you need. But there are other states, and I don't want to name them, where, it's exactly the reverse. And most of us, unfortunately, live in the other states.
Absolutely. Baba, I can only compliment what you're saying. As a chair for CII MNC, I'd requested the states, what the government did for passport, please do for us. We all know what the passport experience was before, and we know the passport experience now. Today, it is transparent, it is non-hierarchical, and you know exactly what you're getting and when you're getting. So I've been requesting many of the states to come forward for a common dialogue between CII, states, and center. And instead of making a pitch on marketing for the state, to say how many of your total approvals are in the single window. And will you give a deemed approval for reputed companies and rank them into platinum, gold, silver, based on the merits of the case? So I think these dialogues need to continue. But what you most important said, we need to have the ability to have an eye contact dialogue respectfully from both sides to solve India's situation and challenges, and including the state situation. And there are good states and there are not so good states. So I can only compliment what he said. Over to Naren. Naren, I have been lucky to have started my career in your company. And the first day I'd been to the blast furnace. So I just want to ask you one thing, because you have dealt with labor, Tatas have done, like Baba and many other big companies, ethical practices, taken care of people, and yet you have optimized, yet you have trained. So if I ask you this question, that in India, our challenge still, if I link up to what both of you said, the educational system, which is still not practical and in times. If I take the country for the last 30 years, which I go Germany, vocational training, to get people to hit the ground running, to ensure that modern technology gets embedded in the education system, and then to have a far higher level of productivity, including in labor intensive. What would your view be when you look today of the huge transformation that you already did in Jamshedpur, and then you hired the bar 3x, 5x with Kalinga? What would your simple way forward be?
Soumitra, obviously we need to keep changing with the times, and the factors which drive competitiveness keeps changing, right? So even if I look at Tata Steel, when I joined the company 32 years back, or 34 years back actually, or let me put it this way, today we are 10 times the size in India. I'm not even counting our global footprint. In India, we are 10 times the size as far as steel production is concerned from when I joined. And we are 15 times the size as far as mining is concerned from when I'm joined. And we are at 40% of the workforce we had then. Okay, so that's the scale of change. And we are not done yet, right? As you said, the newer plants are even more productive than the older plants, right? But at the same time, with pride, I say that our workers are paid much, much, much higher than they were then. And our workers are probably amongst the best paid workers in the country, right? And we are happy, we are proud about that. But productivity is also coming to world-class levels. So I think that's a good situation to be in. But having said that, I think what you asked is a very fundamental point. I feel in India, we have obsessed more about education than about skills. Okay. And it's a social issue as well. So everyone wants to get into the good colleges. You hire an engineer, you will ask, where did you do your engineering? You hire a welder or a fabricator, you don't care whether he or she has been trained anywhere, what certificate have they got? Are you willing to pay a premium for somebody who's got trained well compared to the others? And I think what happens, and I think Baba's company and our company and your company as well, we have very strong training programs. So we just bring in people, train them. And I know that in Bharat Forge, you can join at shop floor level and you're supported to become an engineer, right? So you allow for that learning and development and you encourage that. But if you have to change the whole ecosystem, I think we need to start with the schools. We need to talk about vocational training at the schools level. We need to create respectability about vocational training, which happens. You go to an Australia, you go to a Germany, vocational skills are respected as much as education. Somebody, tongue-in-cheek, told me once, in India, the only time you pay for skills more than education is in sports and in entertainment. Right? So why can't we as corporates, why can't we as industry be fussier about the people who come into our factories? Because oftentimes we just outsource it to contractors, and we don't really care about who they bring in. Who we employ, we take good care about. So we need to change that ecosystem, because government has also told us that unless private sector pays a premium for skilled people, people say, why should I spend money and time getting a certificate which has no value, right? So there is that story, and we need to create a greater social acceptance for vocational skills. And we need to, and there are in many countries that I'm familiar with, crane drivers get paid more than engineers, right? In Australia, somebody driving a heavy mining equipment will get paid more than an engineer, right? So we need to de-link a little bit, have that focus on education, but not be obsessed by it. I think create an equally balanced approach to vocational skills. And I think that's extremely important to address what you said, and to get a high quality workforce. We should be willing to, just like we pay for quality of what we buy, we should pay for quality of who we employ directly or indirectly. Directly, we certainly pay, but indirectly, we need to be more watchful.
So I'm asking you a hypothetical question, and to both of you before we just have the closing part. Naren, you're giving up your presidentship after a fantastic tenure, know you for many years, and in spite and despite COVID having made it hybrid, done all sorts of things. And so this is a hypothetical question. So if you were to take on your mantle today, and Baba, you've done it all and been there, but if you were to take on and say that I want to take on just 3 agendas with the government to not only nurture and retain what is going well, to really bring manufacturing to the fore, which for decades we've talked, but for whatever reason, the score tells it all, that we've had the score, but we are nowhere near 25%, and we need to do that. And India is being looked at. So what would those 1, 2, or 3 points that would really drive the agenda? And that way, actually, you can give to your successors and to CB those points. And many important points were spoken, but what is really the vital few to move the needle?
So who's going first?
It's your choice. 2 big giants, I don't want to interfere.
No, I think I'll, from my point of view, first is what both of you discussed earlier, the center, state, local. I think we need to address that. As Baba said, we have the ease of doing business rating. We also want to do the cost of doing business rating, and we should have that healthy competition between states. I also think as CII, we need to work more closely with the local associations, because a lot of issues are local. It's not even at the state level. It is really at the district level or the block level or whatever. So we need to find better ways to connect with local associations, because sometimes there is a view that CII is good at solving the Delhi problems or maybe the state capital problems, but not necessarily at the local level, right? So we need to, I think, as CII play a greater role there. Second point is, work with the government on policies. I think Atmanirbhar, the support for defense industry, support, all these are very important things, and we need to help them in that, and we need to give them confidence that manufacturing companies are investing, and we will get investments from across. The third point and final point is, of course, on vocational skills, willing to pay a premium for it, create an attraction for people to get into vocational jobs as careers which they can further move into other jobs if required later, but get that buzz about it, get that excitement about it, pay a premium for good skills. I think these are the 3 points which I think I would add.
Thanks, Naren.
I'll give you my 2 bit on this. I totally agree with what Naren has said. But 3 issues, if we have to talk about in terms of what we need to tell the government. When we were in Germany with the Prime Minister, the collective view expressed by the German CEOs is India has significant upside and immense potential to lead the world GDP growth for the next decade. But the experience from the past hasn't been as encouraging. So I think fundamentally India has to accelerate its economic growth to its true potential. The potential, the whole world is seeing the potential being very high. And to make that happen, three things we need to do. We need to break silos everywhere, whether it's at the central government. I think in the central government, many silos are broken now and it works far more efficiently. At the state level, there are too many silos, and we need to break these silos by working with the state governments. We need to work diligently with our research and academic institutions to build technology and intellectual property within the country. Very, very essentially, India needs to be a large manufacturing nation. And I can't overstress or understress this point. You cannot be a manufacturing nation without having intellectual property ownership. And the last point is, of course, skills. I mean, I agree with what Narendran has said. It is vocational skills that we need. We don't need too many engineers. We have already too many engineers coming out of our system. But we don't have people who are vocationally skilled and who can adapt easily to digital technologies when it comes to manufacturing industry. And that's the area where we need to focus.
Thank you very much, Baba. We are at 3:13. The panelists have been excellent, both more importantly on content, but equally important on time. I would just take 1 minute to summarize. My job has been very easy when you deal with such people who know it all, been there and done it all, not just theory. The 3 points that both of you wrote, I promise to get back to CB. Please do also support it. It can actually be a very focused agenda on follow to finish. We will need to institutionalize this to have an eye contact dialogue with center and states, select states. There's a very important point that you talked about district. I agree, being also from the state, I realize that. And then to take these forward and really move the needle. And if we can move the needle on a sustainable basis, I think we'll come a long way. For me, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you, as always. And I now hand over to the moderator 1 minute before time. Alpa?
Thank you. Thank you, sir. That was a wonderful thing. And we thank all our speakers, President Sir, Mr. Kalyani, Mr. Bhattacharya, and of course, all the delegates who will be participating with us. Thank you for joining for this important session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Baba.
Thank you. Thank you, Soumitra. Thank you, Narendran.
Thanks, Baba. Thank you.